Have you ever stopped to wonder why, out of all the names Jesus could have used to describe the infinite, eternal, all-powerful source of existence, Creator, King, Lord, Almighty, Judge, he consistently, deliberately, almost exclusively chose one simple, intimate word? Father? What if this wasn't just a beautiful metaphor or a comforting religious idea, but rather the key to unlocking a truth so revolutionary that once you truly understand it, your entire spiritual life will never be the same? Again, think about it for a moment. Throughout history, prophets and religious leaders have used grand, majestic titles to describe the divine. They spoke of kingdoms and thrones, of power and judgment, of distance and transcendence. But Jesus did something completely different. He used a word that speaks of closeness, of relationship, of inherited nature and unbreakable connection. And here's what nobody has ever really taught you. This wasn't accidental. And it wasn't just about making God seem more approachable or friendly. Most people have heard this word Father thousands upon thousands of times. It's been spoken in churches, whispered in prayers, written in scriptures, and repeated in religious ceremonies for 2 millennia. Yet despite all this familiarity, the profound truth hidden within this single word has remained veiled, obscured, misunderstood by generations of seekers. What does it actually mean? More importantly, what does it reveal about who you really are at the deepest level of your existence? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Has this ever happened to you? You find yourself in a difficult situation, maybe financial pressure, relationship struggles, health challenges, overwhelming anxiety about the future, and you pray. You pray hard. You plead with God to intervene, to help, to fix what feels broken in your life. You pray like someone standing outside a locked door in the cold, hoping desperately that someone inside might hear your knocking and decide to open it. You bargain, if you help me with this, I promise I'll be better, do more, believe stronger. You try to convince the divine that you deserve assistance, that your need is legitimate, that you've been good enough to warrant attention. Sound familiar? This is exactly how most of humanity has approached prayer for centuries, as beggars petitioning a distant deity, hoping our words might somehow travel the vast distance between earth and heaven, and convince God to care about our problems. But here's what changes everything, and I need you to stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might completely transform not just how you pray, but how you see yourself in this entire universe. Jesus never prayed like this, not once. He never begged. He never pleaded his case. He never tried to convince God of anything. Instead, he spoke with a quiet, unshakable confidence that revealed he knew something the rest of us had completely forgotten. When Jesus called God Father, he wasn't using a religious title or offering a theological concept. He was unveiling a reality, pointing to a relationship, revealing an identity that changes absolutely everything about how we understand ourselves and our connection to the divine. And once you see what he was actually showing us, here's the thing that will shift your entire perspective on prayer and spiritual life. Jesus operated from a completely different consciousness than what we've been taught. When he spoke to God, when he addressed the divine, there was never a hint of desperation in his voice, never a trace of uncertainty, never that anxious energy of someone trying to get the attention of a distant, preoccupied authority figure who might or might not respond. He spoke with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who knew something profound, something that had been forgotten by nearly everyone around him. And what he knew wasn't some secret technique or special access that only he possessed. It was a truth about the fundamental nature of reality itself, about the relationship between the divine source and every human being who has ever existed. When Jesus used the word Father, he wasn't reaching for a comfortable metaphor to make an abstract concept more relatable. He wasn't borrowing language from human family structures to help us imagine what God might be like. This is where centuries of religious teaching have missed the entire point. The word Father in Jesus' consciousness wasn't a title at all. It was a revelation of something real, something actual, something that exists whether we recognize it or not. He was pointing to a living relationship that is already present, already operational, already defining the very essence of who you are in this moment. This wasn't poetry. This wasn't symbolism. This was Jesus pulling back the veil on a hidden truth that transforms everything once you see it clearly. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you join this community. We're exploring these deeper spiritual truths together, going beyond surface-level religion into what actually transforms lives from the inside out. Think about what the word Father actually implies beyond the religious context we've wrapped it in. It speaks of origin, of source, of the place from which life itself flows. It speaks of inheritance, not something earned or achieved, but something that belongs to you by the very nature of your existence. It speaks of shared nature, of an unbreakable connection that exists from the moment of birth and cannot be severed by distance, time, or circumstance. When Jesus called God Father, he was revealing that your relationship with the divine isn't about a powerful king occasionally noticing a distant subject. It's not about a stern judge evaluating your worthiness. It's something far more radical, far more intimate, far more revolutionary than any religious institution has been willing to teach you. This understanding demolishes the entire framework most people have built their spiritual lives upon. It challenges the idea that you're somehow separate from the divine, standing on the outside trying to get in. It questions the belief that you need to earn God's attention through perfect behavior, or correct beliefs, or passionate enough prayers. The transformation that happens when this truth lands in your consciousness isn't gradual. It's immediate and total. Your entire approach to prayer shifts. Your understanding of your own identity shifts. The way you navigate challenges, make decisions, and experience daily life begins operating from a completely different foundation. Now, I want to go even deeper into what this actually means in practical terms, because understanding this intellectually is one thing, but grasping its implications for your real life, your actual circumstances, your genuine struggles, your day-to-day existence, that's where the real power of this revelation becomes undeniable. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to see this differently," if something in what I just shared is resonating with something deep inside you. Let me make this as clear and direct as possible, because this is where everything you've been taught about spirituality gets turned completely inside out. You are not a separate being standing at a distance from the divine, trying desperately to bridge some vast cosmic gap. You are not outside looking in, hoping to somehow connect with a source that exists somewhere beyond you. That entire framework, that mental model of separation, is the illusion that's been causing all the struggle, all the anxiety, all the exhausting spiritual striving you've experienced throughout your life. The truth Jesus was revealing is far more radical than that. You are the actual expression of the divine source itself, not a copy, not a reflection, not something created and then set apart. The very life force that animates your body right now, the consciousness that's taking in these words, the awareness that's experiencing this moment. This is divine life expressing itself in human form. This is what Father means when you strip away all the religious conditioning and theological interpretations that have obscured its meaning for centuries. Think about what this means for your identity, for your understanding of who you fundamentally are. Every breath you take isn't just biological function. It's divine breath moving through a human vessel. Every thought, every moment of awareness, every experience you have is the infinite temporarily experiencing itself through the unique lens of your individual existence. This isn't some New Age philosophy or abstract spiritual concept. This is the hidden truth that's been right in front of us all along, waiting for the moment when our consciousness expands enough to recognize it. And here's what makes this so transformative. This isn't about changing what you believe or adopting a new religious framework or joining some spiritual movement. This is about waking up to what has always been true. The relationship between you and the divine source isn't something that needs to be established or earned or achieved through years of practice and dedication. It existed before you were born. It exists right now as the very foundation of your being. It will continue beyond anything your mind can imagine or comprehend. This relationship is the bedrock reality of your existence, operating whether you're conscious of it or not. When Jesus pointed to this truth by calling God Father, he was showing us something that has no gaps, no distance, no separation whatsoever. It's not like a relationship between two separate entities who sometimes connect and sometimes don't. It's more fundamental than that. It's like asking where the wave ends and the ocean begins. The question itself reveals a misunderstanding of what they actually are. The wave never stops being ocean, not for a single moment. It rises, it crests, it crashes on the shore, but through every phase of its existence, it remains nothing but ocean water temporarily taking wave form. That's what you are in relationship to the divine, not a separate creation trying to reconnect with your creator, not a spiritual seeker on a journey toward enlightenment. You are the source itself, momentarily expressing as the person reading these words, living your specific life, having your particular experiences. The inheritance Jesus spoke of isn't something you receive in the future. It's what you are right now, in this exact moment, whether you realize it or not. This recognition changes everything about how you navigate life, how you make decisions, how you respond to challenges, how you understand your purpose and place in this universe. But to fully grasp the implications of this truth, we need to look at what actually happens when someone lives from this consciousness versus living from the illusion of separation. Put down in the comments, "I am divine expression," if you're beginning to see yourself in a completely new light. Let's talk about what this means for every prayer you've ever prayed. Every moment you felt spiritually alone. Every night you've laid awake wondering if God is even listening to your struggles. All of that anguish, all of that spiritual desperation, all of those feelings of abandonment, they all stem from one fundamental misunderstanding about your true nature and your actual relationship with the divine. You've been operating from a false premise, asking the wrong questions, seeking something you already possess but couldn't see because you were looking in the wrong direction. When you pray as a beggar, you're reinforcing the illusion that you're separate from your source. When you plead for divine intervention, you're declaring through your very approach that God is distant, disconnected, requiring persuasion to care about your life. Every "please help me" carries within it the hidden assumption that help must come from somewhere outside you, from someone who might or might not choose to respond. But this entire framework collapses once you understand what Jesus actually meant by Father. In his consciousness, this word pointed to something far more fundamental than a parental relationship. It meant source, the origin point from which your very existence flows. It meant substance, the actual material, the essence, the life force that you're made of. It wasn't describing a being watching over you from some heavenly throne, occasionally deciding whether to grant your requests. It was revealing the foundational truth that the divine isn't separate from you at all. The source of all existence, the infinite intelligence, the creative power behind everything, this is what you are, not what you're trying to reach. Consider how biological inheritance actually works for a moment, because this analogy reveals something crucial. When a father gives life to a child, what exactly gets passed on? The child doesn't receive something temporary, some borrowed qualities that might be taken back later. The child inherits the father's DNA, completely, permanently, irrevocably. Every cell in that child's body carries the genetic code of their father. The characteristics, the traits, the very essence of the father flows through the child's being as their own nature. It's not a gift that can be withdrawn. It's not conditional on the child's behavior or worthiness. It simply is, by the very nature of the relationship itself. This is what Jesus was pointing to when he revealed God as Father. Your divine nature isn't something separate and from you that you need to acquire or earn. It's your actual inheritance, the essence that flows through your being by virtue of your existence. You don't have to become spiritual enough to deserve it. You don't have to prove yourself worthy of divine qualities. They're already yours, already present, already operating as the foundational substance of who you are. The journey isn't about gaining what you lack. It's about recognizing what you've always possessed, but couldn't see through the fog of separation thinking. This shift in understanding doesn't just change how you pray. It transforms how you make decisions, how you face challenges, how you navigate uncertainty. When you know your source is within you, not external to you, the entire game changes. But there's an even deeper layer to this truth that most people never discover, something about how this consciousness actually operates in real-world situations. Write in the comments, "My source is within me," if this is starting to reshape how you see your relationship with the divine. Here's what I need you to understand with absolute clarity, and I'm going to be as direct as possible because this is where the rubber meets the road. You are not a creation standing on the outside of divinity, looking in through a window, hoping to somehow connect with what's beyond the glass. That entire mental framework is the illusion that keeps you trapped in limitation and struggle. The truth is far more immediate, far more intimate, far more powerful than that. You are the direct expression of the divine source itself, not metaphorically, not symbolically, not in some abstract spiritual sense that sounds nice but doesn't mean much. Actually, really, right now, in this exact moment, if this video brought you clarity, if it shifted something in how you see yourself and God, then hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people discover these teachings. And honestly, it lets me know this resonated with you. Let me break this down to its most basic, undeniable reality. The breath moving through your lungs right now, that's not just biological process. That's divine life force expressing itself through human form. The consciousness that's processing these words, understanding their meaning, following this line of reasoning, that's not separate from divine intelligence. It is divine intelligence experiencing itself through the specific lens of your individual awareness. The sense of you that's experiencing your life in this moment. That's not a separate entity trying to reach God. That is God temporarily experiencing existence through the unique perspective of your human life. This isn't philosophy or religious doctrine. This is the actual mechanics of reality operating right under the surface of your everyday experience. Every moment of awareness you have, every decision you make, every thought that passes through your mind, all of it is the infinite source momentarily focused through the aperture of your individual existence. You are not separate from that source, trying to reach it through prayer or meditation or spiritual practice. You are that source right now, clothed in human form, living this specific life, having these particular experiences. The implications of this truth are staggering when you really let them sink in. It means that everything you've been searching for outside yourself, wisdom, peace, guidance, power, love, is already present as your fundamental nature. It means that the spiritual journey you thought you were on, trying to ascend towards some distant divine reality, has been based on a misunderstanding of cosmic proportions. There's nowhere to ascend to. There's nothing to achieve. There's no level of spiritual development that will finally make you worthy of divine connection. The connection is what you are. The divine isn't something you reach, it's what's reaching through you to experience this moment. Think about what this means for how you navigate challenges. When you face a difficult decision, you're not a limited human hoping that divine wisdom might somehow find its way to you. You are divine wisdom, temporarily experiencing the specific constraints and circumstances of this human situation. When you encounter fear or uncertainty, you're not cut off from divine peace trying to reconnect with it. You are the presence of peace itself, momentarily experiencing what limitation feels like through human perspective. The shift isn't about gaining something you lack. It's about recognizing what's already operating as your deepest nature, hidden beneath layers of conditioning that taught you to see yourself as separate and small. But understanding this intellectually is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when this recognition moves from your mind into your lived experience, when it begins to reshape not just how you think about yourself, but how you actually show up in the world, moment by moment. Put down in the comments, "I am the expression," if you're starting to feel this truth beyond just understanding it mentally. There's a moment in the Gospels that has been misunderstood for 2,000 years, twisted by theologians and religious institutions into something that completely contradicts what Jesus was actually revealing. When he made that stunning declaration, "I and my Father are one," the religious establishment of his time understood exactly what he was saying, and they wanted to stone him for it. But here's the twist that changes everything. They misunderstood his meaning in exactly the same way that generations of Christians have misunderstood it ever since. The religious leaders thought Jesus was claiming to be uniquely divine, setting himself apart from ordinary humanity, declaring himself to be something that no one else could be. And tragically, that's exactly how most Christian theology has interpreted it as well. They've turned this statement into proof of Jesus' exclusive divinity, evidence that he was fundamentally different from you and me, possessing a relationship with God that we could never have. But that interpretation misses the entire point of what Jesus was doing throughout his ministry. He wasn't building himself up, he was waking humanity up. When Jesus said, "I and my Father are one," he wasn't saying, "Look at me, I'm special and you're not." He was saying, "Look at what's true about me, and recognize that it's equally true about you, about every person He's sitting around me, about every human being who has ever drawn breath or ever will." He was holding up a mirror to show humanity what they actually are beneath the layers of conditioning and false identity. He was demonstrating a consciousness that's available to everyone, not claiming an exclusive status that sets him forever apart. This is crucial because it shifts the entire foundation of what spiritual life is actually about. You're not trying to become like Jesus. You're not on a journey to achieve what he achieved or reach a level of consciousness that he attained through unique divine favor. You already are what he was revealing. The oneness he demonstrated isn't something you earn through decades of meditation, rigorous spiritual practice, or devoted religious observance. It's not a reward handed out to those who believe correctly or behave perfectly. It's the foundational reality of your existence right now, in this moment, whether you're aware of it or not. Think about what this means. You already are what you've been desperately trying to become. You already possess what you've been searching for your entire life through spiritual seeking. The peace you're pursuing is your true nature. The wisdom you're hoping to gain is already operating as your deepest intelligence. The connection with divine source you're trying to establish has never been broken. It's simply been overlooked, hidden beneath the false belief that you're separate from your source. The transformation isn't about achievement. It's about recognition. It's about seeing clearly what has always been true but remained invisible because you were looking through the distorting lens of separation consciousness. And once this recognition clicks into place, once you see yourself as you actually are, rather than as you've been taught to see yourself, the entire trajectory of your life shifts from exhausting effort to natural flow. Write in the comments, "I already am," if you're beginning to release the struggle of trying to become something you already are. Let me paint a picture that might completely reframe how you've been thinking about your spiritual life up until this point. Most people treat spirituality like a destination they're traveling toward. They imagine themselves on a long road, moving from where they are now towards some distant place where enlightenment lives, where divine connection waits, where peace and wisdom finally become accessible. They measure their progress. They worry about setbacks. They compare themselves to others who seem further along the path. But here's what shifts everything when you really let it sink in. There is no journey in the way you've been imagining it. The spiritual path isn't about arriving somewhere new. It's about recognizing where you've already been standing your entire life without seeing it clearly. It's like waking up from a dream and realizing that the treasure you've been desperately searching for across vast, imaginary landscapes has been sitting right beside your bed the whole time. The search doesn't end when you finally reach your goal. The search ends the moment you see what has always been present, hidden only by the assumptions and beliefs that prevented you from recognizing it. This recognition transforms how you experience yourself in the world. When you finally grasp that you're not separate from divine source, that you are the actual expression of infinite intelligence and love taking human form, everything about your inner state shifts. You stop living like an orphan, abandoned, uncertain, constantly worried about survival, desperately seeking validation and provision from external sources. You start living as an heir, someone who knows their inheritance, who understands that everything they truly need flows naturally from who they are, not from what they can convince others to give them. There's a perfect metaphor that makes this truth immediately visible. Imagine standing on a beach watching the waves roll in from the ocean. Each wave rises, crests, moves toward shore, crashes, and dissolves back into the water it came from. Now ask yourself this question. Is that wave separate from the ocean? Is it on a journey to become oceanic? Does it need to do anything, achieve anything, transform itself in some fundamental way to finally be worthy of being called ocean? Of course not. The wave is already ocean. It has always been ocean. Every molecule of water in that wave is ocean water. The wave is simply the ocean temporarily expressing itself in wave form. It doesn't need to travel anywhere to reach the ocean. It doesn't need to prove its worthiness to merge with the ocean. It is ocean right now, in this moment, regardless of its shape or size or how high it rises or how dramatically it crashes on the shore. This is exactly what you are in relationship to the divine source. You're not a human being on a spiritual journey trying to reach God somewhere in the distance. You are divine life temporarily expressing itself through human form, experiencing existence through the unique lens of your individual perspective. Just as the wave never stops being ocean for even a single instant, you have never stopped being the expression of divine source for even a single moment of your existence. Put down in the comments, "I see the ocean in the wave," if this metaphor is helping you recognize your true nature beyond the surface appearance. What I'm about to Share with you completely reframes the question of who you are and what your life is actually about. You're not a human being who occasionally has spiritual experiences. You're not a physical creature trying to develop a more connected spiritual side. The truth is far more radical than that. You are God's own life temporarily expressing itself in human form. You are the infinite ocean taking the specific shape of a wave called your name, living your particular story, experiencing this unique perspective on existence. And just like that wave we talked about never stops being ocean water, not when it rises, not when it crests, not when it crashes, not even when it seems to disappear back into the sea. You have never stopped being divine life for even a single moment of your existence. Not when you were born, not during your worst mistakes, not in your darkest moments of doubt or despair, not when you felt most lost or most distant from anything resembling spiritual connection. The divine nature that you are hasn't flickered or diminished or withdrawn based on your behavior or beliefs. It's been constant, unwavering, yong-hung present as the fundamental truth of your being. There was a profound teacher named Edgar Cayce who spent decades of his life helping people wake up to exactly this truth we're exploring right now. Through his work with thousands of individuals dealing with every imaginable form of human struggle, Cayce discovered something remarkable that cuts to the core of why people suffer. Every form of pain, every type of limitation, every experience of lack or inadequacy in human life stems from one single root cause, the belief in separation from Source. Think about the implications of that discovery for a moment. It means that the suffering you experience isn't caused by your circumstances, your past, your limitations, or even by actual external events. The suffering comes from operating under the false belief that you're cut off from your source, disconnected from infinite intelligence and supply, isolated in a hostile universe where you must survive by your own limited resources alone. When you believe you're separate, you live in constant anxiety. You feel you must control outcomes through force. You approach life as a struggle for survival rather than an expression of abundance. This belief in separation creates a mindset that permeates everything: how you make decisions, how you respond to challenges, how you relate to others, how you see your own worth and potential. It's the hidden operating system running beneath all your conscious thoughts, generating fear where there should be trust, creating lack where there's actually abundance, producing isolation where there's profound connection. And the devastating part is that this belief feels so real, so obviously true based on surface appearances, that most people never question it. They just accept separation as the fundamental nature of reality and build their entire lives on that crumbling foundation. But here's where the real transformation becomes possible, when you begin to see through this illusion, when you start recognizing that separation has never been real, that it's always been a misperception rather than an actual condition. Everything shifts from the inside out. Write in the comments, separation is the illusion, if you're starting to see how this one false belief has been affecting your entire experience of life. Watch what happens to your inner state when you operate from the belief that you're fundamentally separate from your source. Every decision becomes weighted with anxiety because you're convinced you're navigating life with only your limited human resources. Every challenge feels overwhelming because you believe you're facing it alone, cut off from infinite wisdom and support. You wake up each day with a subtle tension running beneath everything you do. The constant low-grade stress of someone who believes they must make everything happen through sheer willpower and control. This separation mindset creates a life of exhausting effort. You're always pushing, striving, forcing outcomes, trying to manipulate circumstances in your favor because deep down you believe that if you don't make it happen, it won't happen. You approach opportunities with scarcity thinking, I better grab this now because there might not be more. You relate to others through competition rather than cooperation, because you see limited resources that must be fought over. You measure your worth by external achievements because you have no internal sense of inherent value. The entire experience of being alive becomes a grinding struggle for survival rather than a natural expression of abundance. But here's where everything begins to shift in ways that might seem impossible from where you're standing right now. When you start living from the consciousness that God isn't some distant entity you're trying to reach, but is actually your source and substance right here, right now, when that recognition moves from intellectual concept to lived experience, everything transforms. And I mean everything. You stop approaching life as a beggar because you begin recognizing that you already have access to infinite resource. Not someday, not after you prove yourself worthy. Right now, by the very nature of who you are. This isn't about circumstances suddenly becoming perfect or challenges magically disappearing from your life. Real transformation doesn't work that way. What changes is how you experience everything that happens, the constant struggle that has defined your spiritual life, that exhausting sense that you're always climbing uphill, never quite arriving, perpetually falling short of some standard you can't reach, that suddenly ends. Not because you've finally achieved enlightenment or reached some advanced spiritual level, but because you've discovered a truth that changes your relationship with reality itself. You move from strain to flow, from anxiety to trust, from the white-knuckled grip of control to the open hands of allowing. The shift happens when you stop trying to generate peace through perfect circumstances and recognize that peace is your fundamental nature beneath the surface turbulence. When you stop seeking wisdom from external sources and realize that infinite intelligence is already operating as your deepest mind. When you release the exhausting project of trying to become good enough and see that your worth has never been in question because you are the expression of divine life itself. This transformation doesn't require years of disciplined practice or perfect understanding. It happens in the moment recognition clicks into place, when you see through the illusion of separation and recognize what has always been true about who you are and what your relationship to the source actually is. Put down in the comments, from struggle to flow, if you're feeling the possibility of this shift happening in your own life. Now let me show you what this means for something as practical and immediate as prayer, because this is where you'll see the shift from theory to lived experience. The entire spiritual journey you thought you were on, all the striving, all the effort to become more enlightened, more worthy, more spiritually advanced, has been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. You're not on a journey to become something you're not. You're on a journey to remove the layers of illusion, conditioning, and false teaching that have prevented you from recognizing what you've always been. Think about how radically different those two approaches are. One is about achievement, accumulation, climbing toward a goal. The other is about revelation, uncovering, seeing clearly what's already present but hidden. One exhausts you with endless effort. The other liberates you through simple recognition. Most people spend decades trying to add spiritual qualities to themselves, trying to become more peaceful, more loving, more wise, more connected. But that's like the wave trying to become more oceanic. It's already ocean. The work isn't addition, it's recognition. This shift transforms your entire prayer life in ways that might surprise you. Watch how most people pray. They say something like, "Please, God, help me with this problem. I really need your guidance here. Please intervene in this situation." Listen carefully to what those words actually communicate beneath their surface meaning. That prayer assumes God is somewhere else, up there, out there, in some distant heaven. It assumes divine help must somehow travel from that distant location to where you are. It assumes you need to convince God to pay attention to your specific need, as if the divine might be too busy or too distant to notice what you're going through unless you call out loudly enough. That entire framework reveals the separation consciousness we've been talking about. It's the prayer of someone who believes they're fundamentally disconnected from their source, hoping to somehow bridge that gap through the right words or sufficient desperation. But when you truly understand what Jesus meant by the Father relationship, when that recognition moves from your head into your actual experience, your whole approach to prayer undergoes a complete transformation. You're no longer petitioning an external being to do something for you. You're not trying to get God's attention or convince the divine to care about your situation. Instead, you're recognizing what's already present, already true, already operating in your life in this exact moment. The shift is from "please come help me" from out there to "I recognize that divine wisdom is here as my true nature." Do you see how fundamentally different those two approaches are? One reinforces separation, the other acknowledges unity. This isn't just a different prayer technique or a more sophisticated spiritual practice. This is a completely different understanding of what's actually happening when you turn your attention toward the divine. And once you see it, once this clicks into place in your consciousness, you can never go back to the old way of praying, because it stops making sense based on what you now know to be true. Write in the comments, "I recognize what's already here," if you're beginning to experience prayer as recognition rather than petition. Let me show you exactly how this shift changes your actual experience of life's challenges. When you begin operating from this recognition that you're not separate from your source but are the expression of it, you stop approaching every problem from a place of lack. You stop seeing yourself as deficient, as missing something essential, as needing to acquire what you don't have. Instead, you start approaching challenges from fullness, from the recognition that infinite intelligence and resource are already present as your fundamental nature, waiting to express themselves through you in this specific situation. This isn't positive thinking or trying to convince yourself of something that isn't true. This is seeing reality more accurately than you've been seeing it. When you face a difficult decision and you know that divine wisdom isn't something external you're hoping will show up, but is actually your deepest intelligence that changes everything about how you engage with the situation. You stop the frantic searching for answers outside yourself. You stop the anxious polling of everyone around you. You become still enough to let what's already within you rise to the surface and express itself naturally. Look at how Jesus actually operated when he encountered sickness, suffering, or any form of human limitation. He never once got on his knees and begged God to reach down from some distant heaven and intervene in the situation. Not one single time. That's remarkable when you think about it, especially given how different his approach was from everyone around him. Instead, he did something far more radical. He acknowledged the Father's presence right there in that exact moment, in that specific circumstance. He recognized that where divine life is present, wholeness must be the underlying reality, regardless of what appears on the surface. He understood something that most people completely miss, that the Father's presence isn't something that needs to arrive from somewhere else. It's already the fundamental truth of every situation, hidden beneath the appearances that seem to contradict it. His consciousness wasn't about getting God to show up. It was about recognizing that God is already here, already operating, already present as the invisible reality behind all visible forms. And here's what makes this understanding so transformative when you apply it to your own life. Think about how a good father actually operates with his children. He doesn't sit back and wait for his child to beg convincingly before he provides what's needed. He doesn't make his children prove their worthiness through perfect behavior or eloquent pleading. The provision flows naturally, automatically, inherently from the relationship itself. The child receives not because they've earned it or deserved it, but simply because they are the child. Their identity as the Father's offspring is what opens the flow of provision. This is exactly what Jesus was revealing about your relationship with divine source. You're not trying to convince God to care about you, or provide for you, or guide you. The provision is already flowing based on who you are, the expression of divine life in human form. Your identity is what matters, not your worthiness. Put down in the comments, provision flows from identity, if you're seeing how this shifts everything about how you relate to your needs and challenges. Here's what completely transforms your entire spiritual framework when you really let it penetrate your understanding. Divine supply, divine wisdom, divine peace, divine healing, all of it is your inheritance, not your goal. Read that again slowly, because it changes the entire game. These aren't things you're trying to obtain from a reluctant deity who might grant your request if you ask perfectly enough, or believe strongly enough, or deserve it sufficiently. These qualities already belong to you because of who you are. They're yours by the nature of your identity as the expression of divine life itself. Think about what inheritance actually means. When a child is born into a family, their inheritance isn't determined by their achievements or their worthiness. It's not something they earn through good behavior or lose through mistakes. The inheritance flows to them automatically based on one simple, undeniable fact: they are the child. Their identity establishes their right to what belongs to the Father. They don't create that right through effort. They receive it through relationship. This is exactly what Jesus was, revealing when he called God Father in that mystical sense we've been exploring. When you pray from this understanding, acknowledging God as Father not as a religious concept but as the actual source and substance of your being, you're not trying to manipulate the divine into doing something for you. You're not employing spiritual techniques to bend reality in your favor. You're simply remembering what is already true in this exact moment. You're recognizing a reality that exists whether you're aware of it or not. The shift from begging to recognition might seem subtle, but its impact on your inner state is profound. Begging reinforces the sense that you lack something essential. Recognition affirms that you already possess what you need at the deepest level. Begging creates anxiety and desperation. Recognition produces peace and trust. Begging exhausts you with constant effort. Recognition allows you to rest in what's already present. And here's the truth that liberates you. From years of spiritual striving, nothing needs to arrive. Divine life is already flowing through you as your breath, your consciousness, your heartbeat. Right now, in this moment, as you're taking in these words, that's divine breath moving through human lungs. Divine wisdom is already present as your true intelligence, operating beneath the surface noise of anxious thoughts. Divine peace is already your fundamental nature, waiting to be recognized underneath the turbulence of circumstances. Nothing needs to change in heaven for your life to transform on earth. The transformation happens when your consciousness shifts from separation to recognition, from striving to receiving, from the exhausting effort of trying to make spiritual truths work to the simple acknowledgement of what has always been operating beneath the surface of your awareness. The entire spiritual journey condenses into one essential movement, opening your eyes to see what's been there all along. Write in the comments, nothing needs to arrive. If this is landing in your heart as something real and not just philosophical, let me give you something concrete that demonstrates exactly how this recognition works in actual human lives. Because I know some of you might be thinking, this sounds beautiful philosophically, but wondering whether it actually changes anything tangible in the real world. There was a woman named Margaret who lived with chronic, debilitating pain for 30 years. 3 entire decades. Every single morning she woke up to physical agony that colored every moment of her day. She prayed constantly, desperately, for God to heal her, to take away her suffering, to end the relentless pain that had become her constant companion. She tried every prayer technique she could find. She attended healing services. She consulted spiritual practitioners. She read countless books on faith and divine healing, yet nothing changed. The pain remained, and with each passing year, she felt more abandoned, more hopeless, more convinced that God either couldn't or wouldn't help her. Then Margaret encountered these exact teachings we're exploring right now about the father relationship. At first, she resisted completely. How could she not be separate from God when her body screamed with pain every moment? But something in this truth touched a place deep within her consciousness that recognized it as real. She made a crucial decision that changed everything. She stopped asking for healing. Instead, she began sitting quietly each morning, simply acknowledging God as her actual source and life, present right there in her pain, in her struggle, in her body. Not somewhere distant she was trying to reach, but as the fundamental reality of her being in that exact moment. For weeks, nothing seemed to change on the physical level, but beneath the surface, her consciousness was shifting. Then one morning during her quiet time of recognition, something clicked. She experienced the Father's presence not as something outside trying to help her, but as her very being itself. Within 6 months, her chronic pain was completely gone. Or consider Thomas, who faced complete business failure. His company was hemorrhaging money, clients were leaving, and financial pressure was destroying not just his career, but his family's security. He prayed constantly, desperately asking God to send customers, to improve sales, to somehow rescue his failing business. His prayers felt like shouting into an empty void. Then Thomas discovered these same principles. He stopped begging for business success and instead spent time each day recognizing something profound. That divine intelligence was his true mind. That infinite supply was his actual substance, not something external he needed to acquire, but something he already was. Over months of maintaining this consciousness, opportunities began appearing naturally. Connections formed with people he needed to meet. Solutions emerged from unexpected directions. His business didn't transform overnight, but it stabilized completely as his inner state shifted from panic to trust, from lack to recognition of abundance. Both Margaret and Thomas discovered that consciousness is cause and circumstances are effect. When the inner state transforms through recognition of the father relationship, the outer experience begins reflecting that transformation. Put down in the comments, consciousness is cause, if these stories are showing you how this truth operates in practical reality. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, then something in this message resonated with the truth you've been searching for, perhaps without even knowing exactly what you were looking for. That's not coincidence. That's recognition happening at a level deeper than conscious thought. You're here because you're ready to see yourself and your relationship with the divine in a completely new way. I create content like this because I believe these truths have the power to free people from years of spiritual struggle and confusion. If this video brought you clarity, if it shifted something in how you see yourself and God, then hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people discover these teachings, and honestly, it lets me know this resonated with you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you join this community. We're exploring these deeper spiritual truths together, going beyond surface-level religion into what actually transforms lives from the inside out. This is where we dive into the teachings that most people never hear, the revelations that change everything once you see them clearly. Leave a comment saying, "This message was meant for me." If you feel like you were supposed to find this video today, I read every single comment, and I love seeing where you all are on your journey and what's landing in your hearts. There's a video right here that goes even deeper into how this consciousness actually operates in your daily life. The practical side of living from this recognition. It's the perfect next step after what we've covered today. Click and continue with me over there, because what you've discovered here is just the beginning of understanding who you really are.